Alright guys, and welcome back to the channel, and today I will be giving you my predictions and full card breakdown for UFC 305 live Saturday, August 17th from Perth, Australia, and I absolutely cannot wait to get into it, and we're going to go ahead and jump right into the very first fight. The fights on the right side of the screen will be a little out of order because the UFC has not updated them correctly yet, but we will go ahead and try to match them as best as possible. But the very first fight we are looking at is Casey O'Neill versus Luana Santos. And Teresa Bleda on the right side did have to pull out of the fight, and Luana Santos is stepping in. And it is a very interesting fight because Casey O'Neill came into the UFC looking very good, very promising, looking very dominant. She went on a 4-fight win streak and was just looking like the next hot prospect, and then she just hit a wall. She wound up picking up a decision loss after that 4-fight win streak, and then she wound up getting submitted in her last fight, just kind of putting a damper on the steam and the momentum that she was building. And Luana Santos looked very impressive in her last fight against Maria Agapova, throwing her with a beautiful judo hip toss and submitting her. So Luana Santos has looked pretty impressive so far, and it's a very interesting fight because Casey O'Neill, I still think, has that potential in her. I think she can still get back on track eventually, but I think this is going to be a tough fight for her, and she's going to really have to be on her P's and Q's and be very on point to pick up this win. And I feel as though if Casey O'Neill comes in this fight not firing on all cylinders and comes in looking any bit of, kind of sloppy or not really on her game, I think Luana Santos can be a big problem for her. She's strong, she's powerful, she's got good judo tosses, and she's got great jiu-jitsu. So Casey O'Neill is really going to have to be on point in this fight to get back on track. And a big part of me feels like Casey O'Neill can pull that off and do that as long as she stays consistent throughout the fight. But if Casey O'Neill at any point in this fight makes a mistake, slips up, doesn't, make sure that she has everything lined up, I think Luana Santos can capitalize and probably wind up capitalizing on a mistake from Casey O'Neill. And that's what I feel like is going to happen in this fight, is that O'Neill's going to be looking good for a while, and it's going to be looking like the momentum is in her favor, but I feel like Luana Santos is going to capitalize on a mistake in the grappling, either maybe sweep her in a transition, get her in a judo toss to the ground, and wind up getting on top. And I think Luana Santos is going to wind up picking up this win, and I see her submitting Casey O'Neill in the second round just by being the stronger fighter, the better grappler with the better jiu-jitsu. But if Luana Santos, isn't on her mark and isn't hitting on all her cylinders, if she comes in looking anything less than what she's looked like, then Casey O'Neill could wind up taking over and just dominating her for the fight and, picking up a unanimous 30-27 win. But I do think Luana Santos will capitalize on a mistake in this fight and continue her streak, and Casey O'Neill will move to a 3-fight losing streak. But I kind of hope I'm wrong. I kind of want to see Casey O'Neill get back on track, but I just don't trust her to not make a mistake in this fight and get submitted. All right, and moving on up, we are looking at Jack Jenkins versus Herbert Burns, the little brother of Gilbert Burns. And you want to talk about a difference of world of skill set. Herbert is just not on the level of his brother at all, and he has had a very underwhelming recent run in the UFC. When he first came in, he was looking pretty good, had a knockout against Nate Landwehr. He looked like he was kind of maybe having some potential there, but then Herbert Burns just fell off a damn cliff, and he has looked awful in his last 3 fights. His cardio is terrible. He gasses out very quickly, and then he just gives up. He breaks. And I forgot what fight. I think it was the first KO loss that he had after Nate Landwehr, where he got carried out of the cage and he was crying. It was a really just, it's okay to cry in a tough loss, but it just looked very pathetic, very odd for Herbert Burns. He just looked like he just broke mentally. He was just a mess. and he got carried out of the cage, and then he just got knocked out in his next two fights, and it just does not look good for him. He doesn't have the will, he doesn't have that dog, he doesn't have the cardio, and he just breaks and falls apart in these fights. And Jack Jenkins has looked very good outside of his recent loss to Chepe Mariscal, which was unfortunate because it came from an arm injury. If I remember, I believe Chepe went to take him down. He posted on the arm weird, and he wound up like dislocating his arm or his elbow or something like that. But outside of that, Jack Jenkins has looked, very solid. He's a good striker, good pace, good pressure. And I think in this fight, it's going to be very, very easy for Jack Jenkins to overwhelm Herbert Burns, stay in his face, put that pressure on him, and just break him. And I think Herbert Burns is just going to back up. I think he's going to gas. I think he's going to break. And I think Jack Jenkins is going to TKO Herbert Burns either at the very end of the first or early in the second. But I think he's going to spend the whole first round pressuring Herbert and just breaking him, draining that cardio tank, and just leaving him a mess in there, just a defenseless mess. And I think Jack Jenkins is going to just put that pressure on him, cleanly outstrike him, and TKO him in the second round to move Herbert Burns to a 4-fight losing streak, which is going to put him on the verge of getting cut from the company because there is just no promise there whatsoever. So Jack Jenkins by second round KO is the official prediction there. All right, and moving on up, we are looking at Kenan Song versus Ricky Glenn. And, very interesting fight here. Kenan Song, looking pretty decent in the UFC, but he has picked up losses to Ian Gary, Max Griffin, and his most recent loss was to Kevin Jousset. But Ricky Glenn has not looked impressive at all. I mean, Ricky Glenn is 35 years old. He is on a 2-fight losing streak, and he has been knocked out in back-to-back of those two losses. So it has just not been looking good for Ricky Glenn. And he has not won a fight in 3 years. So, I mean, you're getting up there in age. The chin doesn't get better as you age. And, at 35, coming off 2 KO losses back-to-back is just not good. It's not promising, and it's not going to get better. And Song Kenan, even though he's had some ups and downs, I think he is going to be the better striker in this fight. I think he's going to be sharper, more powerful, and I see him knocking Ricky Glenn out in the first round. I just don't see Ricky Glenn having much success in this fight. I don't think he's going to have success at range. I think he's going to be slower. I think the combinations are going to be slower, and I believe that Kenan Song will be able to get in the pocket with him, get around his slower shots, and I think he tags Ricky Glenn and knocks him out to pick up this win, and I think it's going to be pretty easy. I mean, a low-level guy like Ricky Glenn at 35 with his track record is just, there's nothing promising there. So I think Kenan Song will make this pretty easy, and he should get back on track despite some of his recent up-and-down losses. All right, and moving on up, we are looking at the debuting Stuart Nicoll versus Jesus Aguilar, and a very interesting fight. Stuart Nicoll is brand new coming into the UFC. I have done some research on him on the Australian amateur scene, and the kid has looked pretty impressive. His biggest strong suit is his ground and pound, his takedowns, and his ground and pound. And that is where he has won the vast majority of his fights. He gets guys in the clinch, gets them down, gets on top of them, smothers them, and winds up just TKOing them out. I mean, he's got very good top control. He's very good at flattening guys out and just unloading shots. And Jesus Aguilar, coming off Dana White's Contender Series, has looked pretty decent. He is 2-1 in his last 3, looking pretty okay. But I think in this fight, Stuart Nicoll, I think there's a reason the UFC is bringing him in. I think they see that potential in him. They see what he did on the Australian regional scene, and they see his strengths on the ground. And I think this is going to be an interesting fight for a little bit, but I do see Stuart Nicoll getting Jesus Aguilar down and picking up a 4th consecutive win from just vicious ground and pound. And I think he will find Jesus Aguilar in the clinch. I think he will get him down against the cage, and I think he will just get on top, implement that strong, just top control, and I think he's going to wind up probably maybe getting to the back of Jesus Aguilar, flattening him out and just pounding him out and picking up another win in the style that is suiting him just so strongly right now. So I'm going to trust that the debuting Stuart Nicoll from Australia is going to be able to move to 9-0 and pick up a debut win in the UFC. But it could be a tough fight. I mean, he could come in, maybe Jesus Aguilar shuts that strong suit of his down, and Jesus Aguilar just picks him apart on the feet. But I think if Stuart Nicoll can get inside, get a hold of him, and get him down, I think he will comfortably take control on the ground and TKO him. All right, and we are moving on up to Joshua Culibao versus Ricardo Ramos, and this is a very interesting fight. Josh Culibao, I mean, one thing about him, they are both coming off two-fight losing streaks. And Josh Culibao, even though he's lost some decisions, I mean, he's got great pace, he's got good pressure, he's got a great chin, he's just got that dog toughness about him. And Ricardo Ramos has been very up and down. He is coming off a two-fight losing streak. In both fights, he has been submitted. So Ricardo Ramos is just not reliable on the feet. He is dangerous, but he's just, he's got a lot of holes defensively, and he makes a lot of mistakes. And even though Josh Culibao is not like high-level top caliber, he is that kind of fighter that is going to give you a lot of problems on the feet because he just has an incredible chin. He has very, very smothering, consistent pressure, and he just comes with volume, and he just keeps coming. And fighters like that can continually push at you and just unload and just throw combinations, and you can't hurt them and you can't keep them back. It is going to be very difficult to get around fighters like that, at this level, especially with somebody like Ricardo Ramos, who is just not dependable on the feet and has a lot of issues there. And I think in this fight, even though Ricardo Ramos can be very dangerous if he finds openings with his striking and his jiu-jitsu, I think Josh Culibao is going to put that pace, that pressure on him, and just comfortably outstrike him for 3 rounds. And I think Josh Culibao breaks his two-fight losing streak and gets back on track, and I think he beats Ricardo Ramos cleanly, 30-27 on the cards, unless he makes some crazy mistake, some kind of, leaves out a big glaring defensive hole and maybe gets caught in a submission, a guillotine from Ricardo Ramos. I don't see that happening, though. I think Josh Culibao is going to stay on track. I think he's going to stay consistent. He's going to stay in his face, pressure him, outstrike him, kind of break him, and I think he takes a decision on Ricardo Ramos to get back on track. All right, and we are looking at Walter Walker, who is the younger brother of Johnny Walker, and Junior Tafa is the younger brother to Justin Tafa, and, big, hard-hitting Samoan guys. I mean, just like Mark Hunt. I think these are like the Mark Hunt, the Samoan Islanders. Those guys, I mean, they just have a different level of power, and you're not just going to knock them out. They have great chins, very thick, very stocky, and they all have ungodly, just Samoan Islander power. And Junior and his brother have looked pretty impressive. I mean, they have that fight-ending, just life-changing power. And even though Junior Tafa is coming off the loss to Marcos de Lima Rogério, he did come into that fight on short notice, and unfortunately that was just a bad style matchup for him because de Lima just has a lot of good heavy strikes, very good leg kicks, and he's hard to deal with, and I felt he would be a problem for Junior in that fight. And I think Junior Tafa in this fight, even though Walter Walker, I mean, is huge, he's very long, he's going to have a 9-inch reach on Junior Tafa. I don't think Walter Walker is that impressive at all. I mean, he is coming off a loss to Lucas Bresky, and, he just has not looked very good. Very, very tall, very big, but very slow. And I think Junior Tafa can get inside on Walter Walker, and I think he can slowly plod forward, get around that reach, and I think he can land a bomb on Walter Walker, and I think he can put him away. He is going to have to deal with the size, he is going to have to deal with the reach, but I mean, these Samoan Islanders, him and his brother Justin, are just tough. They have cannon power in their hands, and I think Junior Tafa is going to get around the slower, yet very long range of Walter Walker, and I think he is going to KO Walter Walker. Nothing impressive. I mean, just like Johnny Walker, who's just kind of in the toilet right now and struggling. I think Walter is just going to have issues in this fight, keeping Junior off of him, and I think Junior is just going to get around those shots and wind up putting him away. So we are going Junior Tafa by KO in the first round as the official prediction. All right. And we are moving on up to Tom Nolan versus Alex Reyes. And Alex Reyes is I believe, the older brother of Dominic Reyes. And Tom Nolan, has looked pretty damn impressive. I mean, he's got great striking, great pop in his hands, very nasty on the feet. And Alex Reyes, on the other hand, is 37 years old. He is coming off 2 KO losses, which is not good, kind of in that boat that Dominic has been in up until recently, where he picked up a big, much-needed win. But at 37 years old, I mean, in getting that chin cracked like that and getting knocked out so much, I mean, you are up there in age. You're pushing 40. It is not good for you, just like Ricky Glenn. And Alex Reyes, I mean, you're just not, there's no elevation from here in terms of him getting on track, picking up multiple wins and getting toward being any kind of top contender, not at 37 years old with this low of a skill set. And I think in this fight, Tom Nolan is just going to be too much for him, too quick on the feet, and I think Tom Nolan is going to wind up knocking Alex Reyes out pretty easily in this fight. He's just going to be the sharper, younger fighter in there, the better hands, the better combination striking, and the power is just going to be there all day, and I think he's going to crack Alex Reyes, get through his poor defense, and I think he's going to knock him out pretty easily, probably within the first 2 minutes, because again, at 37 years old, getting knocked out multiple times, it is a bad omen of what's to come. So I think Tom Nolan takes this win by early first round KO. All right, and we are moving on up to Mateusz Gamrot versus Dan Hooker, and this is an absolutely phenomenal fight. I love this fight. I'm a big Dan Hooker fan. I've always liked Dan Hooker, just his style, his grit, the way that he just builds into fights, and he's just very sneaky, and he starts to just kind of build these combinations and download you. And Dan Hooker is just a tough fight for anybody. He's very, very under the radar, but he's very good. And then Mateusz Gamrot, on the other hand, is just looked like an absolute Terminator with his wrestling, his pressure, his cardio, and he's just been nonstop, and he's been on a streak. I believe he's on a 4 or 5 fight win streak, and coming off the dominant win of Rafael dos Anjos, and he's just looked very impressive. Not the most impressive striking, but Mateusz Gamrot's, I mean, his bread and butter is his pressure and his grappling and his wrestling. And that is one thing that's very hard to shut down with him. And even though Dan Hooker is very good at downloading you and picking you apart and just coming forward and landing nasty surprise knees and landing these beautiful combinations, I think in this fight, even though it's going to be very tough, and Dan Hooker could make it very close. This could be, a split decision either way. Could be a very close fight if Mateusz Gamrot is not on point with that grappling and that pressure. But I'm going to trust that Mateusz Gamrot can get past the striking of Dan Hooker, and I'm going to trust that Mateusz Gamrot can out-grapple him in the clinch and get him down, and I think Dan Hooker is going to struggle to keep him off of him. Now, if Mateusz is not careful, he could wind up diving into a knee. He could wind up, diving into a bad combination shot and getting cracked and hurt. And then Dan Hooker could swing the momentum. He's coming off the win against Jalen Turner, which was a very close, momentum-shifting fight, and it was very interesting. Jalen was cracking him with shots, and then Dan Hooker came back and was cracking him with shots and making it very close. So Mateusz is really going to have to be on his game here to pick up this win. But I'm going to trust that he will, and I'm going to say that Mateusz Gamrot beats Dan Hooker by a pretty close decision. It could get close, but I'm going to say that the grappling is there, the cardio is there, and Dan Hooker just cannot keep him off. That Mateusz gets him down, holds him down, controls him, and just that pressure is going to be the difference maker. But I hope it's a really close fight, and I hope Dan Hooker does look decent in this fight, makes it close. Maybe he does pick up this win. It's very possible, but I'm going to say Mateusz Gamrot stays on track, continues the streak, and that pressure, that pace, that grappling gets him this win. Moving on up to the very next fight, we are looking at Li Jiliang the Leech versus Carlos Prates, and what an absolutely awesome and interesting fight that I cannot wait to talk about. Carlos Prates has looked absolutely amazing since he has stepped into the UFC. I mean, his striking is absolutely devastating. Nasty, long-range power. The guy just hits like an absolute truck. And his style very much reminds me of Alex Pereira. Even his frame, his body, the way that his stance, the way that he throws shots. He's very lean, long, and muscular like Alex Pereira. And he has that just just ungodly fight-ending power. And I mean, his striking at range has just looked absolutely incredible, and he's just steamrolling everybody. And the way that he dispatched Charlie Radke in his last fight, I mean, Trevin Giles knocking him out like that, the guy is just, I mean, he's Alex Pereira 2.0 in a smaller weight class, just on the rise, man. And he's so damn impressive, such a problem. And I see so much potential in this kid. And unfortunately for the Leech, he is 36 years old. He's getting up there in age. He is coming off a loss. He's pushing a year, almost a year off, which is not good at that age, and coming off a loss. And, Leech has just kind of been struggling. He's done decent throughout his career. He's picked up some good wins, but he's had some tough losses like the one to Khamzat Chimaev. But, Leech sitting off for a year at 36 years old, it's just not looking good for him. And Carlos Prates is going to have a 7-inch reach in this fight, which is just an absolute recipe for, a nightmare for Leech. So I think in this fight, I think it's going to be pretty one-sided. I think Leech is going to come out. He's going to look okay for maybe a minute or two, try to find the rage in the center. But as Carlos Prates starts to build that timing, that distance, and starts throwing out his long-reach shots, I think he's going to wind up tagging and hurting Leech badly. And I think he knocks the Leech Ji Li Liang out cold. I think he's going to wind up either knocking him out cold with a nasty shot, or he's just going to wind up just barraging him with a TKO and putting him out. And, Prates is here to stay. The kid is going to keep improving. He's going to keep this streak going. And his Alex Pereira style, that frame at welterweight, is going to be a problem for so many people. And I just don't see the Leech handling these shots, weathering the storm well, and at his age and the time off, I think Carlos Prates is just going to wind up steamrolling him. So we are going Carlos Prates, smaller weight, Alex Pereira 2.0 for the KO in the first round. All right, and we are moving on up to Thai Bam Bam Tuivasa versus Jairzinho Biggie Boy Rozenstruik. And what an absolutely incredible fight, man. Incredible heavyweight fight that I cannot wait for. I absolutely love Tai Tuivasa. One of the most fun-loving, exciting heavyweights in the company. And even though he has had it tough and he is on a 4-fight losing streak, everybody still loves Tai Tuivasa. He still has that fight-ending power if he touches you, and he's just such a fun guy, great in the cage, with his striking, when he's not getting taken down and submitted by just better wrestlers. And he has been knocked out, by Sergey Pavlovich, Alexander Volkov, and Rozenstruik is coming off the win against Shamil Gaziev, and, Rozenstruik has been a little up and down, but he's still very dangerous. He possesses that cannon power in his hand. And the difference here is that Rozenstruik is just at a slower pace. He's kind of a one-shot, at a time guy. He'll kind of sit, he'll kind of wait, he'll throw a leg kick, throw a shot, throw a leg kick. But when he has you hurt, that's when he will swarm you like he did to Chris Daukaus, and he will just unload and just put you away with that power. But I think in this fight, even though Tai Tuivasa is coming off 4 losses, and he desperately needs this win to get back on track, to save himself, I think Tai Tuivasa is the problem in this matchup. I think Tai Tuivasa is going to have the better chin. I think he's going to have the better pace, and I think he's going to have that better killer instinct. And that's one thing with Tai Tuivasa, is that he'll kind of throw one shot at a time, but sometimes he'll follow that up with a 1-2 and hurt you. And when Tai Tuivasa hurts you, he absolutely swarms you, and he's just faster. For his size and his weight, he's a very athletic heavyweight. He's very quick. And Jairzinho Rozenstruik, even though he's got that cannon power, he tends to just get stuck in the mud sometimes. Sometimes he does too much waiting, and it costs him. And I think in this fight, Tai Tuivasa is just going to have the better chin. I don't see Rozenstruik cracking him and hurting him at all. I think Tuivasa is going to come forward. He's going to maybe eat a shot or two from Rozenstruik. He's going to get inside, and eventually he is going to crack Rozenstruik with a shot, and I think he's going to follow up for his hometown fans, and I think he is going to put Jairzinho Rozenstruik away in the second round. I think it's going to be a banger. It could be fight of the night, one of the best fights of the night. It's going to be back and forth in moments, but I do trust that Tai Tuivasa will be the faster, quicker heavyweight with the better striking, And I think he's going to find that chin before Jairzinho does because, again, he's a slow starter and he kind of stays stuck in the mud sometimes. So we are going to bank that Tai Tuivasa gets back on track for his hometown fans, lands the big shot, has the swarming TKO finish moment, and I think he finishes Jairzinho Rozenstruik in the second round. And I really just hope he gets back on track because I love Tai Tuivasa. All right, and we are moving on up to the co-main event of the night, which is Kai Kara-France versus Steve Erceg. And this is a very, very interesting fight. Steve Erceg has looked incredibly impressive on his rise in the UFC so far, outside of his very close loss to Alexander Pantoja, which I predicted he would lose correctly because I thought it was just too much too soon for him. And I figured that the difference maker in that fight would be Alexander Pantoja's grappling. His grappling and his pace and his ground game would just be a little too much for Steve Erceg, and he was able to edge that fight out in the grappling. But Steve Erceg held his own. You know, he had moments. He stole. He took 2 rounds from Alexander Pantoja with the better striking. You know, didn't completely dominate, didn't clearly take any rounds super dominantly, but he did take rounds from Alexander Pantoja with his striking, and it's looked very clean and very precise, and he has so much potential still. And even though he took that loss, I think it's very interesting because Kai Kara-France has been around for a while. He's a very well-rounded fighter, great meticulous stand-up striking, you know, very methodical in what he does. But Kai Kara-France has been off a year, and he is coming off 2 losses. And even though his last loss to Amir Albazi was very close and very, very controversial, some say he could be coming off a win and should be coming off a win. You know, he's been off a year, coming off those losses, and coming up against a young and up-and-coming prospect like Steve Erceg, who has such excellent striking and has only been building momentum and improving his skill set, I think it's going to be tough for Kai Kara-France in this fight. I think it could be a very close fight, though. I think it could be very back and forth. I think this could be one of the, you know, best, just in terms of technical striking, best fights of the night, and it could get very close. And even though I went back and forth on it, because Kai Kara-France is so good, and he's just so well-rounded and just fantastic on the feet, I think it's going to be a little tough for him to stand with Steve Erceg the whole fight and cleanly outstrike him. I think Steve Erceg just has the slightly better striking. His hands are a little more crisp, he's a little more quick, and he's just the more polished striker. And I think Kai Kara-France is, you know, his movement's going to be on point. He's going to be, you know, just downloading Steve Erceg and trying to move, you know, around those shots, get in the pocket, try to outstrike him and push him back. But I'm going to trust that Steve Erceg takes a decision win over Kai Kara-France. I just think he has more upside right now. He's got the slightly better striking, and, you know, his defense is very solid. I don't think Kai Kara-France is going to try to mix in any grappling or wrestling. Maybe he does, but I think he's going to try to stand on the feet with Steve Erceg, and I think he's just going to get slightly outpointed. And I think Steve Erceg could pick up a pretty close 29-28, maybe a split win. I mean, Kai Kara-France could wind up taking a round. You know, he could make it close, but I think Steve Erceg is going to pick up this win regardless on the cards, and I see him just continuing to build his momentum and make up for that loss against Alexander Pantoja, which was very close. And Kai Kara-France, you know, even though I think he's a great fighter, I think he might struggle in this one. All right, and we are going to move on up to our main event of the night, and I absolutely cannot wait for this. This is such an interesting fight. I mean, a fight that we've all been waiting for, and we are looking at Dricus du Plessis, the champ, versus the returning Israel Adesanya, the former champ, and it is such an absolutely incredible and interesting fight because, you know, Izzy has not fought in almost a year since he lost to Sean Strickland last year and got absolutely dominated, got pretty much embarrassed, completely shut down for 5 straight rounds, almost knocked out. And we have never seen Izzy in that position before where, you know, he's just getting absolutely overwhelmed and dominated in every single round of a fight in the striking. You know, and Alex Pereira was able to knock Izzy out at the end of their first fight, but Izzy was outstriking him and taking him down the entire majority of those first 4 rounds, first 4.5 rounds. So Izzy was, you know, wasn't even getting dominated in that fight or losing rounds up until the very last few minutes of that 5th round. And even though in the second fight with Alex, Alex was having some success. Izzy wound up against the cage, shelling up and hitting that overhand right twice and knocking Alex out. So, not even Alex has been able to press Izzy back and just consistently dominate and steal rounds from him. And nobody has been able to do that to Izzy over the course of 5 rounds outside of Sean Strickland. And you know that Sean Strickland's pace and his style is so hard to deal with. That pressure, that constant forwardness, that constant shelling up, that constant just teep kicking, throwing shots. And it just completely overwhelmed Izzy, and he just could not handle it. And he just looked like he was breaking every time he was backing up, and he had no answers. He just looked lost, just out in the middle of the ocean with no paddle, no raft, no lifeline, no ring, no anything. So it was a very tough loss for Izzy and very shocking to watch. Just Sean hunt him down, press him back, and just dominate him like that. And it made Izzy look so average, almost below average. But then Dricus du Plessis comes along, and he's just been on an absolute tear, knocking out Robert Whittaker, knocking out Trevin Giles, and then he winds up fighting Sean Strickland for the belt and has one of the best fights at middleweight of all time. Such a close fight, razor close fight on the feet, but in that fight, Sean Strickland was outstriking Dricus du Plessis for the majority of that fight. He had the cleaner work, he had the cleaner jab, he had the cleaner hands, and even though Dricus did land some shots, when it came to the striking in the pocket, Sean Strickland was edging him in those strikes. And the only reason why Dricus du Plessis won that fight, even though it was very controversial, I thought Sean Strickland won that fight, even though it was close. I had Sean Strickland winning that fight 48-47, 3-2. And Dricus did have some success on the feet. The difference maker in that fight was his takedowns. If Dricus did not land those takedowns in that fight, which was the game-changing, sealed and done for the judges, no question, if he did not land those takedowns, Sean Strickland 100% would have won that fight on strikes. So, I mean, yeah, Sean Strickland had a busted eyebrow, but that was from a headbutt. And if you looked at Dricus's face after the fight, it was black and blue and lumped up. Sean only had the busted eye. So the tale of the fight was written all over Dricus's face in that post-fight press conference. You could see the damage all over his face compared to Strickland's just busted eyebrow from a simple headbutt. But Strickland was the better fighter on the feet and only lost that fight because of takedowns. And in this fight, even though I think Dricus du Plessis poses a very interesting set of skills and a very interesting challenge to Israel Adesanya, when Izzy comes into a fight and he is on point and he is on his game, he's the best in the world at middleweight. Nobody can touch him, really. And when Izzy is just, his mindset is correct and he comes in there with that killer instinct, he is a problem for anybody on the feet, trying to figure him out, download his range, his movement, his timing, the way that Izzy throws his shots, how good he is at shot selection and evading and dodging your attack. And it is a problem for so many people and has been for the vast majority of the people he's fought. And I think in this fight, even though it's very interesting, and it could be a pretty close fight if Izzy is not on point, I'm going to say that Izzy is going to come in this fight hungry. He's going to come into this fight looking to prove a point, and he is coming into this fight to take his belt back with a definitive stamp. And I think if you're struggling with Sean Strickland on the feet for the majority of a fight, and you're having trouble finding those range shots and that combination striking, I think coming in against someone like Izzy, who is very good defensively and very good at long-range striking and very good at downloading you at distance, I think Izzy is going to pick Dricus du Plessis apart. I think that outside movement is going to be a problem. That jab is going to be a problem. That switch stance from Izzy. And I think Izzy is going to come in and take his belt back. And I think he picks up a decision over Dricus du Plessis to reclaim his belt and get back on track. And I think Izzy's going to be able to move. I think he's going to be able to switch. I think he's going to be able to land those sharp range jabs, those 1-2s, some of those leg kicks, and I think he's going to be able to circle out. And Dricus does have power. Izzy has to be very careful because Izzy could wind up eating a big shot and getting hurt. It's happened to him in fights in the past with Kelvin Gastelum, with Alex Pereira. Dricus is a problem. But as long as Izzy can circle out to the center, his movement's on point, his range weapons are at point, that jab, his 1-2s are on point, I think he can pick Dricus apart and get his belt back. But he's going to have to be on his P's and Q's. But if he comes into the fight and he just looks like he did in the Strickland fight, he accepts getting backed up, he accepts just getting pushed back and bullied, Dricus could wind up beating him and making him look silly in front of his hometown fans. But I'm going to trust that Izzy is on point. He's the champ. He's the Izzy of old, and he's going to get this done with the better technical, methodical striking, and I think he gets his belt back. All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will be back with my predictions for UFC 306 very soon. Take care, and please subscribe.